I still remember that night like it's carved into my skin. The cold wind, the flashing blue lights, and the way his voice sliced through the air when he told me to step out of the car. I did, calm, polite, just like I always am, but he didn't see a woman that night. He saw a stereotype. He saw color before character. And when his hand met my face, when the sting burned across my cheek, I tasted blood and silence at the same time. He didn't know who I was. None of them did. The company that funded their precinct? Mine. The paycheck that fed their families? Signed by my hand. I was their boss, their billionaire CEO, and they had no idea. When they found out, I watched their faces go pale, the weight of their arrogance crumbling right in front of me. I'm Ayana, and this is my story, the night a uniform forgot humanity, and a woman chose grace over vengeance. Before we go deeper, I want to welcome you to my world, where pain met power, and truth had a voice. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, I truly want to know. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, go ahead and hit that like button. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I always believed that power didn't need to shout. That it could whisper through the way you walked into a room, through the calm that followed your name. For years, I had worked to build a world where people like me, people who looked like me, could sit at the head of the table and not be questioned. Every decision, every sleepless night, every boardroom battle, had led me here, to the top floor of a building with my name etched in silver on the wall. Yet, beneath all the glass and success, there was still that ache, that constant reminder that no amount of wealth could buy the feeling of truly being seen. I grew up on the east side of Brookview, in a small apartment with leaky ceilings and walls thin enough to hear your neighbor's prayers. My mother used to tell me, Ayana, when they can't see your worth, make them feel it. Those words became my compass. I carried them from the streets to the corporate towers, through every insult disguised as a compliment, every board member who called me young lady instead of Madam CEO. And even when I smiled, even when I wore the designer suits and diamond watches, there was always that quiet battle between dignity and fatigue. That night, I wasn't a CEO. I was just a woman driving home after a long day, in a hoodie and jeans, hair tied up, face bare. I liked it that way. It reminded me that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. My assistant had called earlier to remind me about a meeting the next morning with the city's police funding board, a group of people I knew all too well. I was their main donor, the woman who kept their grants alive. Irony, right? I never thought I'd meet them the way I did that night. The road was quiet, the city lights painting golden lines across my windshield. Music hummed low on the radio, old jazz, the kind my mother loved. Then came the sirens. At first, I thought they were passing. But when the sound grew closer, when the blue lights began to dance behind me, I knew they were for me. My heart didn't race, not yet. I pulled over, rolled down the window, placed my hands on the steering wheel like I'd been taught. I've always been careful. The first officer walked up fast, heavy boots, short temper. I could feel it before he even spoke. License and registration, he barked, not looking at me, not seeing me. I told him calmly they were in the glove compartment. He told me to move slow, his hand resting on his gun. That's when the second one came around to the passenger side, tapping the flashlight against the glass. "What's your business out here this late?" one asked. "Just heading home," I said. His eyes narrowed, scanning me like I was something out of place. The light hit my face and lingered, not on who I was, but what I was. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. "Ma'am." That word, ma'am, had weight. Not respect, not courtesy, just authority. I stepped out, trying to stay calm. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, "Keep your head high, baby. Never let them see you flinch." But the air was sharp that night, filled with something bitter and unspoken. I asked what was wrong, what reason they had for stopping me. The answer came with a smirk and a shrug. You looked suspicious. Suspicious. That word always finds me, no matter what I wear, no matter where I go. Before I could say anything else, another patrol car pulled up. 3 more officers. My quiet drive home had turned into a spectacle. I could see a couple watching from across the street, one recording on their phone. I should have felt scared, but what I really felt was tired. So tired of moments like this, where my humanity became a question instead of a truth. You think you're better than us, one of them muttered under his breath as I tried to explain who I was. We know your type. I asked what type that was, and that's when it happened, his hand, sudden and hard, across my face. The world tilted for a second. The sound of the slap wasn't what hurt most, it was the silence that followed. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. I could taste iron, feel my pulse pounding in my ears. My hands shook, not from fear, but from disbelief. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just stunned. Then came the laughter from one of the others, quiet, nervous, like even he knew a line had just been crossed. I looked at the one who hit me and said only, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." He rolled his eyes. "Sure, lady. We'll see about that." What they didn't know was that in less than 12 hours, I'd be standing in front of them again, this time in a boardroom, not a street corner. And when the truth came out, when they saw who I really was, their pride would collapse in on itself. Sometimes, life has a way of setting up its own stage, the kind that makes justice look poetic. But before that moment comes, let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated so deeply that even your silence became a statement? Tell me in the comments, because I want to hear your story too. They said I was being detained for questioning, but we both knew it was punishment for refusing to shrink. The cuffs were cold, tighter than they needed to be, biting into my wrists as the officer dragged me toward the patrol car. I kept my chin up, even as the neighborhood lights blurred behind me. The woman across the street still filmed everything, her phone trembling, her whisper carrying in the night, "Keep recording, girl." I heard her, and that small act of courage kept me breathing steady. Inside the cruiser, the smell of vinyl and stale coffee filled my nose. The one who hit me sat up front, silent now. Maybe he felt the weight of the camera. Maybe he didn't care. The ride to the precinct was short but stretched endlessly in my head, each passing streetlight flashing across my face like a reminder that the city I helped rebuild still didn't recognize me. I thought of my mother, of what she'd say if she saw me now. Even queens get caged sometimes, baby. But cages don't last forever. She was right, as always. When we reached the precinct, I could feel the curiosity waiting inside. The other officers glanced up, whispering, exchanging looks. A black woman in designer sneakers and restraint-tight wrists was nothing new, but something about me unsettled them. Maybe it was my calm. Maybe it was the quiet way I looked around like I owned the place, because, technically, I did. The lobby had been part of the station's renovation project 2 years ago. I had written the check myself. The marble floors, the reinforced glass, the digital systems, all funded by my company's foundation. I remembered the press release, the handshake with the mayor, the way those same men now staring at me had clapped proudly for the corporate angel who supported law enforcement. They didn't know they were staring at her now. The officer at the desk asked, "What's the charge?" The one who hit me hesitated. "Obstruction, maybe resisting." His voice wavered. The clerk frowned. "You sure?" "Yeah. Sure." The lie hung between us like humidity. They took my fingerprints, my photo, and sat me in an interrogation room that smelled of bleach and old fear. The chair creaked when I leaned back. The mirror on the wall reflected a version of me that felt both familiar and foreign, eyes tired but unbroken, lips still pressed into something that looked like patience. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. A different officer stepped in, older, gray around the temples, carrying authority without swagger. "What happened?" he asked the younger cop. "Routine stop." She got mouthy. "Mouthy," I repeated quietly. He turned to me. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Hollis. Would you like some water?" His tone was careful, professional. I could tell he already sensed something was off. I nodded. He left for a moment and came back with a bottle, setting it in front of me. "Can I ask what you were doing in that area tonight?" "Driving home from work," I said simply. "And where's work?" "Downtown," I answered. He waited for me to elaborate, but I didn't. I wanted to see how far this charade would go. "Look," he said after a pause, "there's a misunderstanding somewhere. Let me talk to my officer and get this straightened out." He stepped outside. Through the thin walls I could hear fragments of their conversation, his voice firm, the younger one defensive. "You put hands on her?" Hollis asked. "She was resisting. You hit her?" Silence. "Then, you'd better hope this doesn't bite us." The door opened again. The sergeant's expression had shifted. He no longer looked irritated, he looked cautious. "Ms." he began. "Ayanna," I said. "Ayanna what?" "Williams." His eyes flickered, as if the name tickled a memory. "You wouldn't happen to be connected to—" He stopped himself, studying my face. "Never mind. I'll make a call." And he left. I sat alone, counting the seconds. Outside, the hum of the precinct faded into a kind of nervous quiet. Something was shifting, like the air before a storm. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to sound like a heartbeat. I watched the red hand sweep over each second as if it were dragging time itself through molasses. Every creak, every muffled conversation beyond the door fed the silence sitting with me. I'd always believed the most dangerous thing in a room wasn't anger, it was quiet. Quiet made people think. Quiet made guilt grow. 10 minutes passed before the sergeant returned, his expression a strange mix of suspicion and unease. "Ms. Williams," he said carefully, "can you confirm your full name and date of birth?" I told him. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing, and then pulled out his phone. "I just need to verify something." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. He stepped outside again, and this time, the voices were sharper. The young cop, the one who'd struck me, was raising his voice. "What's the big deal, Sarge?" "She's just—" He cut himself off when he saw Hollis's face darken. "Do you have any idea who that woman might be?" Hollis said. "You think I pull rank for nothing?" "That's Ayanna Williams." The Ayanna Williams. The CEO of Apex Global. I heard the words echo through the hallway, dull at first, then hitting like thunder. The same name printed across every training report, every sponsorship letter, every piece of donation paperwork that kept their department afloat. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost painful. Then came the shuffle of boots, the clatter of a phone dropping. I closed my eyes, taking one slow breath. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger was a luxury. I was calculating. Listening. Measuring how deep the humiliation would cut once they realized the scale of their mistake. A few minutes later, the door opened again. The young cop walked in first, his face pale, lips parted as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. Behind him, Sergeant Hollis looked grim, holding his cap in his hands like he was standing in a church. "Ms. Williams," he said, "there's been a serious misunderstanding. I want to personally apologize on behalf of—" "No," I interrupted softly. "Not yet." I looked at the officer who had hit me. "Do you know what you did?" He swallowed hard, staring at the floor. "I You thought wrong, I said. You thought like too many others do. You saw what you wanted, not what was there. He nodded, barely. His knuckles were white where he gripped his belt. The sergeant cleared his throat. We've already called the chief, ma'am. He's on his way down. I understand if you'd prefer to leave, or we can have a statement prepared. I'll stay, I said. This is my building, after all. That caught him. His brow furrowed. Your building? Apex Global funded this precinct's reconstruction last year. I attended the ribbon cutting. Some of your staff were there. His mouth opened, then closed again. The younger cop's breathing had gone shallow, almost ragged. I didn't mean, he started. Don't finish that sentence, I said quietly. Meaning doesn't erase damage. He sat down, shoulders sinking, the badge on his chest glinting under the harsh light like a reminder of everything he thought made him powerful. I could feel the sergeant's discomfort, his shame filling the space like a fog. Ms. Williams, the chief has requested to speak with you privately, Hollis said. He's on his way now. I nodded, eyes still on the officer. Then we'll wait together. The minutes stretched again, but this time the silence wasn't mine. It belonged to them. I watched the sweat gather at the corner of his temple, his hand twitching as if he wished he could undo what he'd done. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years building bridges between corporate influence and public service, preaching empathy, fairness, reform, and here I was, the living proof that change hadn't reached the heart yet. When the door finally opened again, the precinct chief stepped in, a tall man in a pressed uniform, the kind who carried both age and reputation. His eyes landed on me first, then on his officers, and in that single look, I could tell he already knew the story. Ms. Williams, he said, voice low but formal, I don't have the words to express how deeply sorry we are. This is not who we are. I gave him a long, measured look. Then who are you? He hesitated. There it was, the truth, caught between his pride and his conscience. We're men who made a mistake, he said finally. No, I replied, leaning forward. You're men who made a choice. The room went still again. He exhaled slowly, eyes dropping to the floor. I'll handle this personally, he murmured. You have my word. I stood, straightened my shoulders, and let the air settle. Your word, I said softly, won't fix the world. But maybe tonight, it can start something. I reached for the door, pausing as my reflection glimmered faintly in the mirror. The same face that had been dismissed minutes ago was now being treated like royalty, and that contrast hit me harder than the slap ever did. The chief led me into his office, a large, sterile room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old paperwork. The blinds were half closed, slicing the light into narrow bands that cut across the floor. I noticed the framed newspaper articles on the wall, one of them showing a smiling version of him shaking hands with me from a year ago. I remembered that day vividly. We'd both given speeches about unity, accountability, and progress. How strange that the same man who had once thanked me for believing in justice was now apologizing because justice had failed me within his own walls. He gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. Ms. Williams, he began softly, this is unacceptable. Officer Crane, I cut in before he could finish. That's his name? Yes. Officer Daniel Crane, he said, his voice steady but cautious. He'll be placed on immediate suspension pending review. Internal Affairs will handle the report. I stared at the small plaque on his desk engraved with the department's motto, to serve and protect. I'm not here for his suspension, I said. He looked up, startled. Then what are you here for? I met his eyes. I want to know what kind of system you're running that makes a man like that feel untouchable. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand slightly. Don't tell me about policies. Don't recite your code of ethics. I've read them. I helped fund them. His face tightened. I know, he said quietly. And I know we failed you. I could tell he meant it, but meaning wasn't enough. Regret didn't erase the bruise still warming my cheek or the memory of that slap echoing in the night. You didn't just fail me, I said. You failed every person who'll walk into this building tomorrow and see that badge and wonder if it means safety or fear. He nodded, looking older by the second. You have every right to be angry. I smiled faintly. I'm not angry, Chief. I'm disappointed. There's a difference. Silence stretched again. Then he said, would you allow me to make this right? I tilted my head. And how would you do that? By listening. By letting you lead the conversation about reform. You've always been one of the few who understood both worlds, the corporate and the civic. Help us fix what's broken. His words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to believe him. But trust wasn't something you handed back after it was dropped, it had to be rebuilt, one apology at a time. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded slowly. That's all I can ask. I turned toward the door, but before I could leave, I caught sight of my reflection in the dark glass. My eyes met the faint image of the chiefs behind me. You know, I said quietly, it's ironic. The hand that struck me tonight was funded by the same one that paid for your new training center. Maybe it's time we train hearts instead of hands. He didn't respond. He just looked down, his fingers tightening around the pen on his desk. I walked out of that office and back into the corridor where the officers waited, their faces pale and rigid. The hum of conversation stopped the moment they saw me. Officer Crane was sitting on a bench, elbows on his knees, eyes red. I stopped in front of him. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, it was with the expression of a man stripped bare. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. I didn't know, you didn't need to know, I said gently. That's the point. You shouldn't have to know someone's status to treat them with respect. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I understand that now. Do you? I asked. Because understanding means changing. It means facing what you've done and choosing better when nobody's watching. His hands trembled as he nodded. The room was painfully quiet. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, some ashamed, some sympathetic, some just confused. I wanted to leave, but something inside me said to stay a moment longer. Tell me something, officer, I said softly. When you look at me now, what do you see? He hesitated. A woman I wronged. Good, I said. But when you walk out that door, I hope you see more than that. I hope you see every person you've ever stopped, questioned, or judged, and remember that they all carry stories you can't see. He nodded again, this time with tears in his eyes. Yes, ma'am. That word finally sounded different, no longer laced with authority, but humility. I turned toward the sergeant, who was still standing near the door. I'll be back in the morning, I said. We have a lot to discuss. He blinked. You're coming back? Yes. To talk about reform, training, and maybe, forgiveness. His expression softened, as though something heavy had just been lifted from his shoulders. I started walking toward the exit, the sound of my heels echoing down the hall. But before I reached the door, I paused and looked back. Chief, I called. He looked up from his office doorway. Yes? Don't try to cover this up, I said. Don't make it about damage control. Let it hurt. Let it make you uncomfortable. That's the only way it changes anything. He nodded once, solemnly. And as I stepped into the cold night air, the city lights glimmered against the windshield of my car like 1,000 quiet witnesses. I sat for a long moment before starting the engine, the hum of the motor steadying my heartbeat. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this night wasn't over. Not yet. When I woke the next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of my penthouse, warm but blinding. I hadn't slept much. My cheek still ached faintly, a dull reminder of the night before. As I stood before the mirror brushing my hair, I noticed how the mark had already started to fade, yet the weight inside me hadn't. News travels fast in a city like Brookview, especially when the internet smells injustice. By the time I checked my phone, there were already headlines spinning out of control. Unknown woman assaulted by police officer. Anonymous source claims incident filmed. The video from the woman on the street had gone viral overnight. My assistant, Claire, called before I could even sip my coffee. Ayana, she said breathlessly, you're trending. Everyone's talking about the video. Did they recognize me yet? I asked. Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Prepare a statement. Not corporate, personal. I want it to sound like me. She hesitated. You're really going public with this? Yes. Because silence protects the wrong people. After the call, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, staring out at the city I'd spent a lifetime building. I thought about the young officer, Crane, how fear and ignorance had molded him, how easily one bad moment could define an entire life. I didn't hate him, I pitied him. Hate would have been easy. But I'd learned long ago that easy rarely heals. By noon, the chief had already left 2 voicemails asking to meet. The mayor's office had called too. I agreed to meet at the precinct again, but this time, I wasn't walking in as a victim. I was walking in as a leader. When I arrived, news vans were already parked outside, cameras trained on the entrance. Flashes sparked as I stepped from the car, reporters shouting questions. Ms. Williams, do you plan to sue? Do you think this was racially motivated? Will you withdraw your company's funding? I didn't answer. I simply walked past them, the sound of clicking shutters blending with the steady rhythm of my heels. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. Conversations halted when I entered. The same walls that had watched me in handcuffs now seemed to lean back in shame. The chief was waiting in the briefing room, along with Sergeant Hollis and 2 city officials. Officer Crane wasn't there yet. Ms. Williams, the chief began, I can't express how deeply. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. We're not here for apologies today. We're here for accountability. He nodded, motioning for me to sit. We've already started an internal investigation. The city's PR team. This isn't about PR, I interrupted. It's about culture. About what's happening behind the scenes, when the cameras aren't rolling. Hollis nodded faintly, eyes fixed on the table. I could see the guilt in his posture, it weighed on him. I turned to the officials. My company will continue funding the department, I said. But from now on, that funding will come with conditions, mandatory training on bias, empathy, and de-escalation. I want every officer, from recruit to captain, to sit in a room and listen to the people they claim to protect. The mayor's aide scribbled notes furiously. That's a reasonable request, he said. Request? I corrected. It's a requirement. The chief looked up, a flicker of something like admiration crossing his face. You're not just angry, he said. You're building something out of this. Anger that doesn't build is just noise, I replied. The door opened then, and Officer Crane stepped inside. His uniform was gone, he wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled, eyes hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept. He paused when he saw me, then lowered his gaze. Ms. Williams, he said quietly, may I speak? The chief glanced at me. I nodded. Go ahead. Crane took a shaky breath. I can't take back what I did. I can't undo the way I saw you that night. But I've been sitting in my apartment replaying it over and over, and I keep hearing your voice when you said meaning doesn't erase damage. You were right. I let my uniform become armor for my own fear. I thought authority gave me control, but it just hid the parts of me that were broken. His words cracked somewhere in the middle, but he didn't stop. I know an apology isn't enough, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. The room was silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to pause. I studied his face, the trembling hands, the quiver in his jaw, the sincerity he hadn't been capable of the night before. I don't forgive you yet, I said softly. But I see you trying, and that's a start. He nodded, tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. That's more than I deserve. No, I said, that's exactly what you need, to earn what you thought you already had. The chief cleared his throat. We'll proceed with the suspension, he said, but I hope, Ms. Williams, that one day you'll see this department differently again. I smiled faintly. Maybe I already do. For the first time, I'm seeing the cracks clearly, and cracks are where the light gets in. As I left the room, I passed by a window overlooking the courtyard. Officers were coming and going, their laughter muted, their steps slower than usual. For the first time, I sensed reflection instead of routine. Maybe, just maybe, something had sparked here tonight. Something that could burn away the old and make space for better. That evening, I stood before a wall of cameras in the Apex Global Conference Hall, the same space where I'd once unveiled million-dollar partnerships and expansion plans. Tonight, there were no shareholders, no suits, just truth. The lights were bright, too bright, but I refused to hide behind shadow. Claire adjusted the microphone and whispered, "You ready?" I nodded. The hum of reporters filled the air like static. When I began speaking, the room fell silent. My name is Ayanna Williams, I said. Last night, I experienced something millions of people face but few talk about. I was stopped by police, questioned without cause, and struck across the face. Not because of what I did, but because of what I looked like. I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I'm here to remind us all that respect cannot depend on recognition. A murmur moved through the crowd, cameras clicked in rapid rhythm. The man who hit me didn't know I was a CEO, a donor, or a billionaire. And that's exactly the problem. Dignity shouldn't require a resume. It should come standard with being human. I paused, letting the words breathe. Today, I met with the precinct and the city. We're not erasing what happened. We're rebuilding from it. Apex Global will launch an initiative called Project See Me, a reform and education program designed to train officers in empathy, accountability, and emotional awareness. I will fund it personally. Gasps rippled through the room. A reporter called out, "Why help the same system that hurt you?" I met her eyes. Because healing is the loudest revenge. The crowd hushed again. We can't keep shouting at broken things and expect them to fix themselves. We have to reach in, get our hands dirty, and change the foundation. I felt my throat tighten, emotion pressing against restraint. I'm not naive. I know this won't erase centuries of pain, or the fear that still lingers in the air every time a siren blares behind someone who looks like me. But I believe in redemption, and I believe people can learn. Even those who've hurt us. My gaze found the back of the room where Officer Crane stood quietly, hat in his hands. His eyes met mine just long enough to acknowledge what words could not. I was taught, I continued, that when someone hits you, you have two choices, hit back or stand taller. I choose to stand taller. Because the view from up here isn't about pride, it's about perspective. Applause erupted, not the loud, hollow kind, but the kind that carried respect. I took a small bow and stepped away from the podium. Claire hugged me tightly. You did it, she whispered. No, I said, smiling faintly. We just started it. Hours later, when the cameras were gone and the building had gone quiet, I sat alone in my office with the city lights stretching endlessly below. The bruise on my cheek had faded into a soft shadow, but inside me something new glowed, steady, warm, unshakable. I opened my laptop, typed the words Project See Me, Phase 1, and began drafting the blueprint. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, but for the first time in a long time, they didn't make me flinch. They made me hopeful. I leaned back in my chair, whispering to myself, maybe this is how change begins, not with anger, but with courage that refuses to stay quiet. Then, turning toward the camera that still blinked from the live stream feed, I added softly, if you're still watching, tell me, have you ever found the strength to turn pain into purpose? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you believe we can build something better together. I smiled, ended the stream, and sat back in the silence that followed, not empty, not bitter, but full of possibility. The first 48 hours after the press conference were a blur of noise. The internet was on fire, hashtags, think pieces, strangers dissecting my calm like it was strategy instead of survival. Some praised me for grace, others accused me of weakness, calling me too forgiving, too polished, too corporate. It's strange how quickly people build altars and tear them down. I watched the headlines scroll by on my phone, the comments section bleeding anger and confusion. She's playing the race card. She's protecting her money. She's the kind of woman we need. None of them knew me. None of them knew the weight of choosing peace over rage. I had spent the last decade being called powerful, but that weak power felt like a cage made of glass, transparent and fragile. Claire begged me to stay offline, to rest, but I couldn't. I needed to understand what my message had started. Late at night, I scrolled through clips of people debating my worth, my sincerity, my tone. It wasn't the hate that stung, it was the disbelief that compassion could coexist with justice. I thought forgiveness was strength, but the world seemed to think it was surrender. By the third night, the exhaustion hit me. I sat on my balcony, a blanket around my shoulders, watching the city pulse below. Somewhere out there, Officer Crane was probably sitting in his own silence, drowning in guilt. I wondered if he saw the same posts, the same divided outrage. Did he hate me for exposing him, or did he hate himself more? My phone buzzed, an unknown number. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but something in me answered. Ms. Williams? The voice was low, uncertain. This is Daniel Crane. My heart paused. How did you get this number? Sergeant Hollis gave it to me. He hesitated, the sound of a shaky breath on the line. I'm sorry for calling, but I needed to say something before Internal Affairs finishes their report. I stayed silent, letting him fill the space. I can't sleep, he said. I keep seeing your face, hearing the way you said meaning doesn't erase damage. I thought if I told the truth to them, maybe it would feel lighter, but it doesn't. It just sits here. His voice cracked. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I'm trying to be better. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. What does better look like to you, Officer Crane? Listening. Learning. Maybe leaving the force if that's what it takes. The honesty in his tone surprised me. You think quitting fixes anything? I asked. No, he admitted, but maybe it stops me from hurting someone else. I sighed, the sound carrying both fatigue and empathy. Running from the fire doesn't make you brave, Daniel. Standing in it and letting it change you does. Silence. Then he whispered, you called me Daniel. That's your name, isn't it? Another pause. Yes, ma'am. Then start living up to it. We stayed quiet for a while, the line filled only with city noise. When he finally said goodnight, I sat there long after, phone still in hand, feeling something complicated bloom in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The next morning, the backlash intensified. A national news host accused me of staging the entire encounter for publicity. A politician tweeted that I was weaponizing empathy. The irony made me laugh until it hurt. People wanted heroes and villains, not humans. I drafted a short post on my social feed: forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without letting it poison you. It went viral, but the noise didn't stop. The resistance wasn't just from strangers, it was inside me too. Every time I saw that viral clip of the slap, I felt the sting again, the humiliation, the echo of my mother's voice telling me to keep my head high. I wondered if I had disappointed her by not demanding harsher justice. I wondered if I had disappointed myself. But somewhere beneath the doubt, I felt that same spark I'd carried since childhood, the one that refused to let pain dictate the story's ending. I wasn't done yet. I had more to say, more to build, even if the world wasn't ready to listen. By the end of that week, my office felt more like a battlefield than a sanctuary. Every meeting was a negotiation between image and intention. The boardroom at Apex Global, usually sleek, polished, humming with confidence, had turned into a space heavy with caution. My executives sat across from me, each one avoiding eye contact like the air itself might shatter. The headlines were still multiplying. Stockholders wanted reassurance. Ayanna, one of the directors, began carefully, "We all admire your courage, but this situation is volatile. Our partners are nervous." I folded my hands on the table. Nervous about what? That I told the truth? "They're worried about optics," he said, wincing as if the word itself were poison. "We're being dragged into political conversations, and they don't want our brand associated with controversy." Controversy? I repeated, my tone sharper than I intended. "You think human dignity is controversial?" No one spoke. I looked around at them, all of them men, all of them pale. If this company can't stand behind its own CEO for standing up to injustice, maybe we need to ask ourselves what we actually believe in. My voice carried more steel than usual, but I didn't care. For years, I'd built this empire brick by brick, and now the very foundation of it was trembling, not because of failure, but because of truth. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind, staring out at the skyline. My reflection looked tired, almost haunted. I wasn't sure if I was fighting for progress or fighting just to prove I hadn't made a mistake. My phone buzzed again, another interview request, another invitation to defend myself in public. I ignored it. For the first time in years, I didn't want to speak. I just wanted to feel without performing. That afternoon, I decided to visit my mother's old house in Brookview Heights. I hadn't been there in years. The place had long been sold, but the neighborhood still held her voice in its wind. As I drove through the narrow streets, kids played basketball in the same cracked driveways I once walked barefoot through. One woman recognized me through her car window and shouted, "We see you, Miss Ayanna. Don't let them break you." Her words hit harder than any insult online. When I parked and stepped out, a group of older women sitting on a porch called out, "You did good, baby. Don't let them twist your story." I smiled faintly and waved. For a moment, the noise of the city, the boardroom politics, the cameras, all of it faded. These were my people, the ones who didn't need to Google my worth to believe it. I sat on a curb where I used to wait for the ice cream truck, remembering my mother's voice. "Don't let anyone tell you being soft makes you weak, Ayanna. It takes strength to stay gentle in a world that's cruel." I whispered it to myself, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. "I'm trying, Mama," I said quietly. "But sometimes it feels like the whole world's trying to harden me." A little boy on a scooter stopped nearby, staring at me with wide eyes. "You're the lady from the news," he said. "The one that got hit." His voice was small but full of curiosity, not pity. "Yeah," I said, crouching to his level. "That was me." "Did it hurt?" A little, I admitted. But you know what hurt more? That he thought he could do it. He nodded solemnly, then asked, "Did you hit him back?" I smiled. "No, I didn't." "Why not?" He frowned. "My mama says you gotta fight back." "Sometimes," I said softly, "fighting back looks different. Sometimes it means teaching people what they did was wrong, so they never do it again." He thought about that for a second, then grinned. "You're kinda like a superhero, then." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "Maybe just a stubborn lady in nice shoes." He giggled and rode off, and I sat back on the curb, feeling something inside me loosen, some of the fear, some of the bitterness. That moment reminded me why I'd spoken out in the first place. Not for the cameras, not for the board, but for the ones who were watching quietly, wondering if their own voice could matter too. By the next week, I could feel the tide turning, not just outside the company, but inside. Whispers carried faster than facts. Some of my senior staff stopped meeting my eyes in the elevator. Others avoided my floor entirely. The same people who had once bragged about working for a visionary woman now spoke my name like it was a liability. I caught fragments of their conversations. "The stock's unstable, she's emotional, she's making it political." Every word chipped at me. Claire tried to shield me from it, but she couldn't protect me from the subtle betrayals. One morning, I walked into a meeting that I wasn't supposed to find out about. Half the board was there, along with a PR consultant I didn't recognize. The conversation stopped the second I entered. "Don't stop on my account," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my pulse was hammering. The consultant, a slick man in a gray suit, cleared his throat. "Ms. Williams, we were just discussing brand positioning. How to, manage the fallout." "Fallout from me being assaulted?" I asked. No one answered. "You're talking about managing my humanity like it's a marketing problem," I said quietly. "Let me make something clear. I built this company from nothing. I hired you because I believed you could build with me. But if you think for 1 second that distancing yourselves will protect this brand, you've already forgotten what it stands for." I turned to leave, but the consultant's voice stopped me. "With respect, Ms. Williams, sometimes stepping back helps everyone move forward." I turned slowly, locking eyes with him. Stepping back is what people do when they've run out of courage. I left before anyone could respond. My hands were shaking by the time I got to my office, but my resolve was sharper than ever. I slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. "They're scared," Claire said softly from the corner. "Fear makes people do ugly things." I nodded, staring at the city beyond the glass. "Let them be scared," I said. "I'm done shrinking so others can stay comfortable." That afternoon, I sat at my desk drafting an email to my entire company, every employee, every partner, every intern. I wrote about accountability, about empathy, about why the cost of silence was too high. I didn't clear it with PR. I didn't ask for permission. I just hit send. Within an hour, my inbox was overflowing. Some messages were full of praise, employees sharing stories of discrimination they'd never dared to voice before. Others were angry, accusing me of dividing the workplace. I read every single one. Each message was a reminder that real change doesn't come wrapped in applause, it comes covered in resistance. That night, when I finally made it home, I poured a glass of wine and sat in the dark, letting the city hum around me. My reflection in the window looked older somehow, less polished, more real. Maybe this was what transformation actually looked like, messy, painful, uncertain. I thought about Daniel again. Was he somewhere trying to rebuild too? Did his colleagues see him as a traitor for admitting what he'd done? We were both standing in different kinds of storms, but storms have a way of teaching you what still holds. My phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. They're giving me desk duty for now, Daniel wrote. But I've been attending those community sessions you started. Listening hurts, but it's helping. I stared at the text for a long time. Then I typed back, good. Growth should hurt a little. He replied, you ever doubt what you did? I stared at the blinking cursor before answering, every day. But I keep choosing to believe in the bigger picture. His next message came after a pause, then maybe I can believe in it too. I set the phone down and exhaled, realizing that the world outside might not be ready for change, but somewhere deep inside both of us, it had already started. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. It was a Thursday morning, gray and wet, the kind of day that felt heavy before it even began. I was halfway through signing documents when Claire rushed into my office, her face pale. Ayanna, turn on the TV. My stomach sank as the screen flickered to life. There I was again, my face, my name, splashed across every network. But this time, it wasn't about courage or change. Someone had leaked confidential company emails, twisting sentences from my private exchanges into something ugly. The headlines screamed, CEO exploits assault for publicity. A talk show host sneered through a smirk, asking, was this entire ordeal just a performance? I felt my throat tighten, my chest constricting. Claire muted the TV, but the damage was already done. Who leaked them? I asked. We don't know yet, she whispered. But the board is calling an emergency meeting. They're talking about removing you temporarily until this blows over. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Remove me from my own company? The absurdity of it burned. For the first time since the night of the incident, I felt small again, powerless in a room full of power I had created. Maybe they just need time, Claire said, but her voice lacked conviction. I walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. No, I said quietly. They need courage. And right now, they don't have it. For the first time, I wondered if I still did. That afternoon, I walked into the boardroom alone. The same faces that once celebrated my every move now looked at me like a liability. The chairman cleared his throat. Ayanna, this is a difficult situation. Public trust is fragile, and we have to protect the company. I looked at him calmly. You think sacrificing integrity protects anything? This isn't personal, he said. It's business. Everything is personal when it costs you your soul, I replied. There was a pause before he said, we're voting for a temporary suspension of your duties. The words hit like a slap I didn't see coming. I wanted to argue, to fight, but something in me went still. I realized no amount of logic could save me from fear dressed as professionalism. Do what you must, I said, standing. But remember, every empire that forgets its values eventually crumbles. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the rain had turned to a steady downpour. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't care. The cold soaked through my clothes as I walked the long block to my car. Each drop felt like punctuation to a truth I didn't want to face. The world only applauds your strength until it threatens their comfort. I drove without a destination, ending up at the edge of the river. The water was dark, restless, reflecting the city lights in broken fragments. I sat there for what felt like hours, gripping the steering wheel. For the first time, I felt the cracks spreading inside me. Maybe I had pushed too hard, expected too much. Maybe the idea that love and justice could coexist was naive. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. Just saw the news, he texted. I'm sorry. None of it's fair. I stared at his message, unable to reply. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones when you've carried too much for too long. I leaned back, closing my eyes, listening to the rain drum against the windshield. For a fleeting second, I thought about disappearing, leaving the noise, the expectations, the endless proving. But then my mother's words echoed again. You weren't built to break, baby. You were built to bend and rise. I exhaled, whispering to the darkness, I don't feel strong right now, Mama. Somewhere deep inside, though, strength still flickered, small, stubborn, and alive. I didn't know how to fix everything, but I knew this wasn't the end. Not for me, and not for the story I'd started. I spent the next 2 days in silence. No cameras, no meetings, no Claire hovering anxiously by my door. Just me, the quiet, and the echoes of everything I'd lost. My suspension had gone public by morning. Every news outlet had a headline about the fallen CEO. Some painted me as a martyr, others as a manipulator. But I didn't open the articles anymore. I'd stopped letting strangers narrate my life. Instead, I sat in my living room with notebooks spread across the coffee table, sketching out ideas for Project See Me, the reform initiative I'd promised. Even if Apex didn't want me, I would find another way to fund it. The rain outside hadn't stopped since that awful board meeting. It drummed on the windows like a reminder that storms always overstay their welcome. By the third evening, I decided to get out of the house. I drove aimlessly, ending up at a small community center on the south side, the same one my mother used to volunteer at. I hadn't planned to go inside, but the sound of voices drew me in. When I stepped through the door, I froze. The room was filled with people, officers, local residents, teens, sitting in a circle of folding chairs. At the front, a familiar figure stood speaking softly. Daniel. He didn't notice me at first. His posture was humble, uncertain, but his tone was sincere. I'm not here to defend what I did, he was saying. I'm here to understand why I thought it was okay. I'm here to unlearn. His words hit me like a wave. I stood quietly near the back, arms crossed, trying not to draw attention. One of the facilitators, a woman in her 60s, nodded at him. That's what accountability looks like, son. Facing the mirror, not the audience. Daniel smiled faintly, then glanced up. His eyes found mine. For a heartbeat, he froze. The room seemed to shrink. Then, with a quiet nod, he continued speaking, though his voice trembled slightly. A few weeks ago, I thought my uniform made me the good guy. But power's a dangerous mirror, it only shows you what you want to see. That night, I didn't see a woman. I saw a threat. And I've been asking myself why ever since. His honesty was raw, unpolished. It wasn't for the cameras, it was real. When the session ended, people filed out slowly, murmuring thanks to one another. Daniel walked toward me, hesitant, like a man approaching a ghost. You didn't tell me you'd be here, he said softly. I didn't know I would, I admitted. You were impressive in there. He looked down, shaking his head. I don't want to be impressive. I just want to be decent. For the first time, I smiled genuinely. That's a good place to start. We stood in silence for a moment. The air between us wasn't heavy like before, it felt open. How did you even find this place? I asked. Sergeant Hollis told me about it, he said. He said if I wanted to make real change, I had to start where the pain lives. I nodded slowly. Smart man. He hesitated before speaking again. I heard about what they did, suspending you. It's not right. Maybe not, I said, but sometimes the only way to expose a weak foundation is to let it crack. He looked at me then, really looked. You still believe people can change? I met his gaze. I have to. Otherwise, what's all this for? He nodded, then extended his hand. I stared at it for a long moment before shaking it. His grip was firm but careful, like he was holding something fragile. If you ever need help with Project See Me, he said, I'd like to volunteer. Are you sure? I asked. You'd be standing beside the woman you assaulted on camera. He smiled, a hint of self-deprecation in his eyes. Then maybe people will see what real accountability looks like. I studied him for a moment longer, then said softly, all right. But this isn't redemption, Daniel. This is the work before it. He nodded. Understood. When I walked back to my car, the rain had finally stopped. The streets glistened under the lamplight, the air crisp and clean, as if the city itself had exhaled. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel, peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because the story wasn't over. Not yet. 3 weeks after the suspension, I got the call I never expected. The mayor's office wanted to fast-track Project See Me as a joint venture between Apex Global and the Brookview Police Department. My stomach twisted as I listened to the proposal, an official partnership meant to promote community healing. I should have been proud, but the thought of sitting across from uniformed officers again, discussing empathy like it could be scheduled on a calendar, made my skin crawl. The mayor's assistant was relentless. It'll show progress, she said brightly. You'll be leading the sessions. I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream that progress wasn't a photo opportunity. But something in me whispered, if you don't lead this, someone else will, and they won't mean it. So I agreed, even though every part of me resisted. 2 days later, I walked into the community hall where the first pilot meeting was being held. Folding tables, stale coffee, the faint scent of old carpet and disinfectant, it felt more like a school gym than a bridge between worlds. I was early, which meant I had time to steady my breathing and rehearse my calm. I'd barely poured myself a cup of coffee when the door creaked open. Daniel stepped in, his expression uncertain, his hands fidgeting like he wasn't sure what to do with them. He wasn't in uniform this time, just jeans and a gray sweater. Morning, he said quietly. I nodded. You're early. Didn't want to be late, he said, managing a half smile. Didn't want to make another bad impression. The corner of my mouth twitched despite myself. I think that ship already sailed. Yeah, he admitted softly. But maybe there's another one coming. We worked in silence for a while, setting up chairs, taping posters, arranging folders of training material. It was strangely domestic, mundane, even. But beneath that quiet, I could feel the tension humming. Every time our hands brushed, he flinched like the air between us burned. When more people started arriving, officers, volunteers, community members, I put on my professional voice. The one that didn't tremble. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being part of the first Project See Me session. Today isn't about blame, it's about perspective. My words felt practiced, but sincere. I introduced Daniel as the liaison for the department, watching the confusion ripple across the crowd. I could almost hear their thoughts. Why him? Why her? Daniel took the microphone next. Some of you know who I am, he began, his voice unsteady. Some of you have seen the video. I'm not proud of it. But if this project's about seeing each other, then I guess I have to start by being seen. A few murmurs, a few nods. I caught his eye and gave a subtle nod back. For the rest of the morning, we guided discussions about fear, bias, and human stories that don't make headlines. It was messy. People cried. People shouted. Some officers walked out halfway through. But some stayed, and that mattered. At one point, a woman from the community raised her hand. Ms. Williams, how can you even sit next to that man after what he did? The room went still. I looked at Daniel, then back at her. Because if I want the world to change, I said softly, I can't keep talking to people who already agree with me. Her expression softened, though her eyes stayed wary. Daniel looked like he wanted to speak, but I motioned for him to let the moment breathe. When the session ended, the energy in the room felt different, not healed, but cracked open. People lingered to talk instead of leaving in silence. As the crowd thinned, Daniel approached me. "You didn't have to defend me," he said. "I didn't," I replied. "I defended the idea that people can change." He looked at me for a long time before saying, "You still believe that?" "I'm standing here, aren't I?" He nodded, and for the first time, the tension between us didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door, just barely open, but open all the same. The next few days blurred into one long stretch of uneasy cooperation. The mayor's office had insisted that Daniel and I work side by side to draft the training materials for future Project CME sessions. That meant hours in a cramped conference room, 2 laptops, a stack of reports, and an ocean of unresolved tension. Every morning I told myself I could do this, that professionalism could eclipse discomfort, but every glance, every pause between sentences, reminded me of the night he hit me. Sometimes I caught him looking down at his hands, as if still trying to scrub off the memory. On the third morning, he arrived before me, coffee already brewing. "I figured we'd need it," he said when I walked in. I nodded, setting down my bag. "Good instinct." We worked quietly for a while, the only sounds the clack of keys and the distant hum of city traffic. Then he broke the silence. "You ever get tired of being the strong one?" I froze, surprised by the question. "What makes you think I'm strong?" He gave a small, almost rueful smile. "Because you keep showing up. People like me mess up and hide. People like you take the hit and keep walking." I studied him for a long moment. "You think strength is about not breaking? Isn't it?" "No," I said softly. "It's about breaking and choosing to rebuild anyway." He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. For the first time, the space between us didn't feel hostile, it felt human. Later that afternoon, while reviewing the section on empathy, I noticed his handwriting in the margins of the workbook draft. Next to a paragraph about active listening, he'd scribbled, "Understanding doesn't mean agreeing, it means being willing to feel what isn't yours." I didn't comment, but my chest tightened. He was learning. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. When the mayor's communications director stopped by to check on our progress, she smiled too brightly. "This collaboration is fantastic optics," she said. "You two working together, what a symbol." I forced a polite smile, but inside I bristled. We weren't a symbol, we were two broken people trying to rebuild something that might never be whole. After she left, Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Optics," he said. "Funny how people always want the picture without the story." "That's how the world works," I said. "They want healing without hearing." "Do you ever get tired of explaining yourself?" he asked. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Every day." "But if I stop, who tells the story, right?" He didn't have an answer. Around 6, we took a break and walked outside. The air was cool, the streets damp from an earlier drizzle. We stopped by a food truck near the corner. Daniel offered to pay, but I shook my head. "You still owe me for the coffee," I said. He smiled sheepishly. "Right. I guess I do." As we ate in silence, I realized how strange it was to feel almost comfortable. Not forgiving, not yet, but not angry either. When he spoke again, his voice was low. I keep replaying that night, trying to understand what snapped in me. I looked at him carefully. "And have you?" "I think fear," he said. "But not of you. Of what I'd see in myself if I stopped pretending I was in control." The honesty in his words made something inside me ache. "That's a dangerous kind of fear," I said quietly. "The kind that turns humanity into threat." He nodded. "Yeah. I learned that too late." I tossed my empty cup into the trash, brushing my hands together. "Maybe not too late," I said. "You're here, aren't you?" He looked at me then, really looked, and there was something different in his eyes, not guilt, but gratitude. A small silence stretched between us, not awkward, just full. For the first time, I wondered if our forced proximity wasn't punishment at all, but something that might just be leading us both somewhere we needed to go. When the mayor's office called to confirm that Daniel and I would be traveling together for the upcoming community outreach event, I almost laughed. It felt like the universe had a twisted sense of humor. The event was 2 hours out of town, a weekend summit bringing together business leaders, local activists, and police officers to discuss social responsibility. There were hotel rooms, long car rides, shared stages, shared microphones. Forced proximity taken to an entirely new level. On Friday morning, Daniel pulled up outside my house right on time. He'd traded his usual gray sweater for a navy button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the effort visible. I climbed into the passenger seat, the faint scent of coffee and fresh detergent filling the car. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. The drive started in silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the highway and the low drone of the radio. I tried to focus on the landscape, gold fields, gas stations, clouds stretching like unspoken thoughts, but my mind kept circling back to him. To us. Halfway through, Daniel spoke quietly. "I know this trip probably isn't easy for you." I turned to look at him. "No, it's not. But easy things don't change anything." He nodded, eyes fixed on the road. "You always talk like that." "Like what?" "Like every sentence has a purpose." I smiled faintly. "That's what happens when you spend your life being misheard." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, and for a moment, I thought he might apologize again. Instead, he said, "Do you ever stop? Like, just, rest?" I laughed softly. "Rest feels like guilt when there's still work to do." "Maybe you deserve some anyway," he said. The words were simple, but they hit somewhere deep. No one had told me that in a long time. When we reached the hotel, the staff recognized me immediately, their politeness crisp and slightly nervous. They gave us adjoining rooms, probably the mayor's idea, to make coordination easier. The thought made me sigh. As I unpacked, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My reflection looked composed, but my heartbeat betrayed me. When I opened my door to grab something from the hallway, Daniel was doing the same. We both froze. "Guess we're neighbors," he said. "Guess so," I replied. The evening event was a panel discussion about leadership and accountability. We sat side by side under the bright stage lights, microphones clipped to our jackets. The moderator introduced me first, Ayanna Williams, CEO of Apex Global, then Daniel, with a noticeable pause. Officer Daniel Crane, representing the Brookview Police Department. The audience murmured, everyone knew the story. As questions began, I found myself speaking with practiced calm about systemic change, community empathy, the cost of silence. Then the moderator turned to Daniel. "Officer Crane, what have you learned from this experience?" The room fell quiet. He hesitated before answering. "That apology isn't enough. That justice isn't revenge. And that the person you hurt might just be the one who teaches you how to be better." I felt the audience's eyes shift toward me. I kept my gaze forward, but my throat tightened. When the session ended, applause filled the hall, not thunderous, but genuine. Outside, as the crowd dispersed, Daniel caught up to me. "You didn't have to sit next to me tonight," he said. "But you did." "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I did it for the people watching. They need to see what accountability looks like when it's not easy." "Still," he said quietly, "thank you." We walked back toward the hotel in silence, the night air heavy with unspoken things. At the elevator, I turned to him. "Tomorrow, we visit the youth center at 10. Try to get some rest." "You too," he said, stepping out onto his floor. But as the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls, and for the first time, I didn't just see the woman who'd been hit. I saw someone who'd survived, who'd chosen to rebuild rather than burn it all down. And somewhere, buried beneath all the history, a strange feeling stirred in me, one I didn't yet have a name for. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the hotel curtains, streaking across my notebook where I'd been jotting ideas before dawn. I hadn't slept much. The conversation, the applause, Daniel's quiet sincerity, it all replayed in my mind like a film on loop. I told myself it was just the stress of the summit, but deep down I knew it was something else, something I wasn't ready to name. By the time we arrived at the youth center, a converted warehouse covered in murals and graffiti art, I had my composure back. Kids laughed in the courtyard, basketballs thudded against cracked pavement, music drifted from an open window. The center director, a woman named Ruth, greeted us with a hug that smelled like she'd been baking all morning. "We're honored to have you both," she said warmly. "These kids need to see faces that prove people can change." Her words hit harder than I expected. Inside, the walls were plastered with photos of the community, smiling kids, local officers, volunteers. Daniel stopped to look at one photo, a young black boy posing proudly in a police cap too big for his head. "He used to want to be a cop," Ruth said quietly. "Then the protests happened. Now he says he wants to be invisible." Daniel's expression fell. "Maybe we can change that," he murmured. The day unfolded slowly, beautifully. We spoke to small groups about leadership and responsibility, about what it means to see the world beyond fear. At one point, a teenage girl asked me, "Ms. Williams, are you really not mad anymore?" I looked at her, the curiosity, the pain, the hope. "Anger is human," I said. "But staying angry is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die. So no, I'm not mad. I'm building something instead." The girl smiled, and I saw Daniel glance at me, something unreadable in his eyes. During lunch, we sat outside on the curb, paper plates balanced on our knees. "You're good with them," he said quietly. "You talk like you remember what it's like to be one of them." "I was one of them," I said, smiling faintly. The girl who got told she'd never belong in boardrooms, never belong anywhere too clean or too white or too male. And yet, here I am. "Here you are," he repeated, almost to himself. We watched the kids playing, the sun catching in their laughter. There was a strange peace in that moment, a stillness I hadn't felt in months. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a while. "If you could go back to that night, would you change anything?" I exhaled slowly. Part of me wishes I hadn't gone out. That I'd stayed home, stayed safe. But another part of me knows that if that night hadn't happened, I'd still believe the world changes from a distance. It doesn't. It changes when you're knee-deep in the pain, trying to turn it into purpose. He nodded, silent, and for a moment, our eyes met and held. There was no pity there anymore, no tension. Just understanding. Then Ruth's voice broke the moment. "Ayanna, we'd love you to see our new library before you go." Inside, the space was small but bright, filled with donated books and mismatched furniture. A group of little kids sat on the floor, listening to a volunteer read aloud. Daniel leaned down, picked up one of the books, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "Fitting choice," he murmured. "Yeah," I said. "A story about justice, courage, and perspective. Feels like the universe has a sense of irony." We shared a quiet smile, and for the first time, I didn't see him as the man who hurt me. I saw the man trying to learn from it. As we left the center, the kids waved, calling out our names. One boy shouted, "You two make a good team." I laughed, shaking my head. If only it were that simple. But when I glanced at Daniel, he was smiling, too, and something about the way he looked at me made my heartbeat stumble. I turned away quickly, pretending to adjust my bag. The drive back to the hotel was quiet, but not awkward. The silence between us had changed, it wasn't heavy anymore. It was something like peace, fragile but real. Still, deep inside, I could feel a new conflict rising. Forgiveness was one thing, but what was this other feeling blooming beneath it? Attraction? Affection? Hope? I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. The room felt too still, the city hummed too far away. My thoughts wouldn't quiet, echoes of the day, the kids' laughter, Daniel's words, the way he'd looked at me when I spoke about anger and purpose. I tried to bury it all beneath logic, but my heart wouldn't cooperate. Around midnight, I gave up pretending and went downstairs. The hotel lobby was empty except for the night clerk scrolling his phone behind the counter. I poured myself a cup of stale coffee and sat by the wide glass window overlooking the parking lot. The lights flickered in the drizzle, everything soft and gray. I was lost in thought when I heard footsteps. Daniel appeared, wearing a plain white t-shirt, his jacket thrown over one shoulder. Couldn't sleep either? I asked. No, he said, sitting across from me. Too many ghosts. You're not the only one. We sat there for a long time, just listening to the rain. Finally, he broke the silence. You ever wonder what forgiveness actually feels like? I tilted my head, studying him. Every day. Sometimes I think it's peace. Other times it's just exhaustion dressed as mercy. He smiled faintly. That sounds like you, turning pain into poetry. It's not poetry, I said. It's survival. He nodded, looking down at his hands. I used to think redemption was about being forgiven. But maybe it's about learning to live with what you've done and still choosing to be better. His words hung between us like smoke. I took a slow sip of coffee. Maybe redemption isn't about erasing the past. Maybe it's about building something honest on top of it. He looked up at me, his eyes warm but uncertain. Do you really believe that? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Another stretch of silence, but it wasn't empty, it was full of things we weren't saying. Regret. Gratitude. Something else that scared me more than both. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. When I saw you on that street, I thought I knew who you were. But every time I talked to you, I realized I didn't know anything at all. I smiled faintly. That's growth, Daniel. Or irony, he said. The person I hurt most is the one teaching me how to be human again. His voice cracked a little, and something inside me softened. Maybe that's how change really works, I said quietly. Pain connecting to pain until it becomes empathy. He looked at me then, really looked, eyes steady, almost afraid. Do you ever think we were meant to meet? The question stole my breath. I think we were meant to learn, I said finally. And maybe that's the same thing. We sat there until the rain slowed to a whisper, the world outside washed clean. When I finally stood, I realized my heart wasn't heavy anymore. It didn't mean the past was forgotten, but maybe it no longer owned me. Get some rest, I said softly. Big day tomorrow. He smiled. You too, boss. The word made me laugh, and he grinned sheepishly. I started walking toward the elevator, then turned back. Daniel? Yeah. Whatever happens after this project, don't stop doing the work. I won't, he said. Not just because of guilt. Because of you. I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked away, the sound of his voice lingering behind me like a promise. When I reached my room, I stood by the window, watching the last drops of rain slide down the glass. For the first time since that night, the night that changed everything, I didn't see a victim or a headline. I saw a woman who'd faced her storm and found her calm on the other side. Maybe forced proximity wasn't punishment after all. Maybe it was grace disguised as consequence. And as I finally drifted to sleep, one quiet thought settled in my heart: maybe love begins where forgiveness refuses to stop. It's strange how the end of one chapter can begin with a memory. Weeks after the summit, Project See Me had taken on a life of its own: new volunteers, funding from unexpected places, partnerships sprouting like hope after rain. I'd stepped down from Apex to run it full-time, not because I was defeated, but because I'd finally found where my purpose lived. Daniel stayed involved, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. We worked together often, though now it wasn't forced. It was chosen. And through it all, I found myself thinking about where this story had really started, not on that cold night with flashing lights, but years earlier, in a world that shaped who I became. My father was a bus driver. My mother, a nurse. Both believed in hard work, both believed the world would be fair if you played by the rules. But I learned early that rules were written by those who never looked like me. When I was 17, my older brother, Malcolm, was stopped by police while walking home from his shift at the grocery store. They said he matched a description. He didn't come home that night. The officers were cleared of wrongdoing. My mother stopped singing in the kitchen after that, and my father stopped watching the news. I promised myself I'd never let anyone see me powerless again. That promise built my empire, but it also built my armor. I became so good at being unshakable that I forgot what softness felt like. Until that night. Until Daniel. I used to think God had a cruel sense of irony, letting me face the same pain I'd spent my life outrunning. But now, I see it differently. That night didn't happen to me. It happened for me. To remind me that justice without grace is vengeance, and strength without empathy is just another kind of violence. Daniel taught me that. I remember the day he came to my office, months after the program's launch. He'd finished his probation, was mentoring new recruits, and he wanted to tell me something in person. "Ayana," he said, standing by the window, sunlight cutting across his face, "I'm leaving the force." I looked up from my desk, surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to build something, not just enforce something," he said. Project See Me made me realize I can't fix the system from inside it. But maybe I can help from here. His words caught me off guard. I stood, crossed the room, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. No uniforms. No walls. Just two people who had lived through hell and found meaning in the ashes. "You've changed," I said softly. "So have you," he replied. "No," I said. I think I finally remembered who I was before the world taught me to fight for every breath. We both laughed then, softly, like we'd survived something unspeakable and didn't need to name it anymore. Before he left, he turned back at the door. "You know," he said, "I used to think redemption was for people who deserved it. Now I think it's for people who dare to believe it's possible." I smiled. "Then you've earned it." After he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the city pulse below, sirens, laughter, life moving on. The world hadn't changed overnight, but maybe hearts had started to. And maybe that's how it always begins, not with revolutions, but with small, stubborn acts of humanity. Sometimes, I still touch the faint scar near my jaw, the one from that night, and I don't feel anger anymore. I feel remembrance. A reminder of how far I've come, and how forgiveness, when given freely, can set two people free at once. To anyone listening, I'll say this: pain will change you, but it doesn't have to define you. You can build from it. You can rise from it. You can love again, even after hate tried to teach you not to. And if you've ever been broken by someone's ignorance, don't let that be where your story ends. Let it be where your power begins. Tell me in the comments, have you ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it, and found peace because of it? I want to hear your story too. And if this journey moved you, hit that like button, because stories like these aren't just about me, they're about all of us learning to see one another again. My name is Ayanna Williams, and this was the night the world mistook me for less, and I learned I was always more.